carefully. Sometimes the greatest gift that dazzles a village is the very doorway through which darkness enters. Many people believe that talent alone brings honor, yet a heart that hungers for praise more than truth may become an empty house where evil gladly makes its home. Stay with this story until its final words, for every moment carries a lesson that may one day protect your own steps. Welcome once again to our gathering of wisdom, where every tale is carried from one generation to another, so that no lesson worthy of remembering is ever lost. Tonight, you shall hear of a drummer whose music shook not only the earth beneath men's feet, but the silent places where the dead were meant to rest. Once upon a time, in the fertile kingdom of Nambala, where tall baobab trees watched over winding rivers and the evening wind carried the fragrance of roasting millet, wood smoke, and flowering acacia, there lived a young drummer named Kofi, the son of a humble basket maker. Every market day, the people paused their bargaining when they heard his hands dance across the stretched height of his drum. Children laughed before they realized they were smiling. Elders nodded in quiet admiration. Even travelers passing through the kingdom remembered his melodies long after dust had swallowed the road behind them. Kofi possessed no great wealth. His home stood beside a narrow stream where frogs sang each evening and lantern light escaped through woven red walls. Before every performance, he bowed his head and whispered a short prayer, asking that his music bring comfort rather than pride. Mother often reminded him, a drum can call a village together, but it can also summon what should never answer. Kofi smiled whenever she spoke those words, believing they belonged only to old stories told to children after sunset. Yet not everyone listened to the wisdom of age. Beyond the village fields stood an abandoned shrine, swallowed by thorn vines and creeping roots. The oldest people refused to pass it after dusk. They said no bird nested there, no goat grazed nearby. Even the wind seemed unwilling to linger among its broken stones. Few remembered why the place had been abandoned, only that generations earlier a proud musician had sought applause greater than gratitude, and the earth itself had mourned his choice. There was one person who still noticed the strange things others ignored. A quiet girl named Adisa gathered medicinal herbs for her grandmother each morning before sunrise. While crossing the forest path, she often heard a distant rhythm echoing through the mist, though no drummer could be seen. Sometimes she found fresh footprints leading toward the ruined shrine, but none returning. Once she noticed something even stranger. The morning dew covered every blade of grass, except for a narrow trail where the earth remained perfectly dry, as though invisible feet had walked there during the darkest hours of the night. She spoke of these things in the marketplace. People laughed gently. The child has an imagination as wide as the river, they said. Only old Mama Efua, the village midwife, whose eyes had witnessed more births and funerals than anyone alive, grew silent whenever Adiza spoke. She did not laugh. Instead, watched the abandoned shrine from a distance whenever evening shadows stretched across the fields. As the seasons turned, Kofi's fame spread beyond Nambala. Chiefs from neighboring villages invited him to festivals. Merchants offered him gifts. Hunters claimed that even wild antelope paused when his drum echoed through the hills. The praise settled into his heart like sweet honey, and little by little, almost too quietly to notice, gratitude gave way to pride. Then, one market evening, after a performance that drew the largest crowd anyone could remember, an old traveler approached him. The stranger's robe was faded from many journeys. His walking staff was polished smooth by countless miles. His eyes, however, held a brightness that seemed untouched by age. "You play well," the traveler said softly. Kofi smiled. I know. The old man nodded slowly. There is a rhythm greater than any you have learned. Kofi leaned forward. Teach me. The traveler glanced toward the abandoned shrine. Not every song belongs among the living. He walked away before another word could be spoken. That night, Kofi could not sleep. The stranger's words circled his thoughts like restless birds. Not every song belongs among the living. Curiosity became desire. Desire became obsession. 3 evenings later, when the moon hung low like a silver bow above the trees, Kofi carried his drum toward the forgotten shrine. The forest greeted him with unnatural silence. No cricket sang, no owl called. Even the leaves seemed unwilling to whisper. Only the steady beats of his own footsteps disturbed the darkness. As he crossed the broken stone entrance, he noticed something that should have sent him home immediately. His shadow disappeared. The moon still shone. The trees still cast their shapes upon the ground. But where his own shadow should have followed, there was only bare earth. He looked around uneasily, yet pride spoke louder than caution. It is only fear, he told himself. He raised his drum. He struck it once. The sound rolled across the forest like distant thunder. Then another drum answered from somewhere beneath the earth. And Kofi realized he was no longer playing alone. Listen carefully. Evil rarely reveals its full strength in a single night. It grows little by little, feeding on silence, pride, and the fear of those who believe they stand alone. Yet, remember this also. A single faithful heart, steadfast as an old tree beside a river, can withstand storms that scatter forests. Keep these truths close as the tale continues. The first night after Kofi struck the forbidden rhythm beneath the abandoned shrine, he awoke before dawn with aching hands and no memory of how he had returned home. His drum rested beside his sleeping mat, its wooden frame damp with cold dew, although it had never been left outside. When he touched its surface, he drew back in surprise. It felt as though another heartbeat pulsed beneath the stretched hide. He said nothing. That evening the sound came again. Soft, patient. Boom, boom, boom. Not from his hands. Not from the village square. From the edge of the forest. It called to him until his feet carried him there without thought. Once more he crossed into the ruined shrine. Once more his shadow vanished beneath the moonlight. And once more another unseen drummer answered every rhythm he played. Far away in the village, dogs howled until sunrise. By the third night, the dead had begun to walk. At first they came only as pale figures drifting between the trees. Familiar faces wrapped in silence. They neither attacked nor spoke. They simply wandered wherever the drum commanded. Widow claimed she saw her husband standing beside the old well before disappearing into the morning mist. Children whispered that they heard grandparents calling their names from empty fields. Few believed them. But Adisa did. Before dawn, she followed the strange trail through the grass once again. This time, she found footprints unlike any she had ever seen. Looked human, yet no weight had pressed them into the earth. They rested lightly upon the dust, as though their owners no longer belonged to the world beneath their feet. She hurried to Mama Efua. The old midwife listened without interrupting. At last, she sighed and said quietly, "The forgotten door has opened again." That same day, another sorrow struck the village. The provisions trader, a cheerful man named Kojo, was found asleep beneath a baobab tree and could not be awakened until sunset. When he finally opened his eyes, his hair had turned as white as river foam. "I spent only a moment listening to distant drums," he whispered. Yet it felt as though years passed before I found my way back. Fear spread from house to house. Still, no one suspected Kofi. Each evening, he appeared exhausted. Yet, when he played in the marketplace, his music had become strangely beautiful. People wept without knowing why. Some smiled through tears. Others stared into the distance as if remembering voices long buried. Only Adisa noticed that every performance ended the same way. The birds fell silent. The breeze stopped. And for the briefest moment, Kofi cast no shadow. Spoke again, but the villagers answered with weary smiles. You are only frightened by old stories. When Kofi no longer understood what was happening. Each night he promised himself he would ignore the distant rhythm. Each night, unseen drum answered his thoughts before he even touched his own instrument. The call grew stronger than hunger, stronger than sleep, stronger than reason. At last, he fell to his knees inside the ruined shrine. What do you want from me? He cried. A voice answered from the darkness. Only what you have already given. The air turned bitterly cold. Shapes gathered beyond the broken stones. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. None spoke. None blinked. They simply waited for the next beat of his drum. Kofi's hands trembled. For the first time since his pride had led him into the forest, he whispered the prayer his mother had taught him as a child. The answering drum fell silent, only for a moment. But in that moment, someone else heard. An elderly pastor named Samuel, who often rose before dawn to pray for the village, lifted his head as the silence settled across the hills. Darkness fears the name of the Most High, he said softly. Its strength is not endless. He gathered Mama Efua and Adisa before sunrise. Together, they spoke the truth they had each seen from different corners of the village. The missing shadows, the wandering spirits, the unnatural music. At last, the scattered pieces formed one picture. They knew where the next night's path would lead, and this time, Kofi would not walk it alone. Listen carefully. Truth may walk slowly, but it never loses its way. When a community chooses courage over fear and humility over pride, even the darkest night begins to surrender to the coming dawn. The following evening, Pastor Samuel, Mama Efua, Adisa, and several respected elders quietly followed Kofi into the forest. Hidden among the trees, they watched him step into the ruined shrine as the ghostly drum answered his own. Pale figures emerged from the shadows until the clearing seemed filled with restless souls. Pastor Samuel raised his voice in prayer. The eerie rhythm faltered. Kofi dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I wanted honor, he cried. Instead, I have become a servant to darkness. The unseen voice thundered with anger, but the villagers stood together instead of fleeing. As their prayers and songs rose cracks, spread across the ancient altar, the answering drum split apart with a sharp cry, and the spirits slowly lifted like morning mist beneath the rising sun. Peace returned to their faces before they disappeared forever. Kofi's own drum fell silent. When the first light touched the shrine, the vines around its stones withered away, and the heavy darkness that had covered the forest for many nights was gone. Back in the village, Kofi stood before everyone and confessed what he had done. No excuses passed his lips. He accepted responsibility for his pride and begged forgiveness from those who had suffered because of his choices. The elders chose mercy with wisdom. Kofi laid aside his drum for many months, serving widows, repairing homes, and helping the poor without seeking praise. In time, the people saw that his repentance was genuine. When he finally played again, every performance began with a prayer of gratitude, and never again did he seek applause above truth. Remember these truths. The first truth: a gift without humility can become a doorway to destruction. The second truth: the smallest warning should never be ignored simply because it comes from an unexpected voice. The third truth: when people stand together in faith, truth, and courage, darkness cannot keep its hold forever. Even today, the old shrine lies in quiet ruin beneath the baobab trees. Travelers say the place is peaceful now. On calm evenings, only the sounds of birds and the wind can be heard. Elders still tell the story to every new generation so that talent will always be guided by wisdom and honor will always bow before goodness. The end. But let the lesson never leave your heart.